Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of ISB to this exciting event today, and I hope you're all well, inshallah. Dr. Shoaib has kindly given us access to all the publications and resources he's used for this talk today. They're all free for you to access, so just in case any of you wanted to read a little more after this event, then the link to this page should also be in the chat, so feel free to use that. So yeah, I'll just stop sharing that. Okay, so without further ado, I'll introduce Dr. Shoaib. He did an amazing talk for us on evolution, for those of you who were present at that a few months ago, and we're really honoured to have him here with us today. He studied chemical engineering and graduated with honours in his undergraduate programme at the University of Bath in 2010. Afterwards, he was awarded a fully funded PhD scholarship in chemistry and chemical engineering at the University of Nottingham. On completing his scientific studies, Dr. Shoaib pursued further studies in Islamic theology and philosophy, and recently finished his MSc of Philosophy and Science and Religion at the University of Edinburgh. He currently holds the position of Assistant Professor of the Natural Sciences at Zaid University in Dubai, and he has a book coming out on Islam and evolution in 2021. So yeah, I'll just hand over to Dr. Shoaib.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Rahma, thank you very much for the wonderful introduction. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank Islamic Society of Britain for inviting me again to deliver a short session on atheism. So this is like round 2 of this. So I'm going to just quickly share my slide here. As was mentioned by Rahma, there's a link where you can find my published work. This talk is based on a very short booklet that I wrote about 2 years ago for Kalam Research and Media. It was a commissioned work, so it's a short monograph. And there, what I try to do is just try and cover the various dimensions of the interface of Islam, of atheism and Islam. And what I'm trying to do here is probably highlight some of the main concerns, but the monograph in of itself is much thicker and fuller. So if you do want to get more details, please do refer to the monograph. And I've tried to make this as succinct as possible so that hopefully we can have more space for Q&A, and inshallah we can maybe interact with some of the comments and concerns that you guys may have. So this is the overview of today's conversation. I'm going to briefly touch on who the new atheists are, because atheism really got rejuvenated with the new atheism setting. So I think it's very good to acknowledge who these people are and where they come from. I then want to establish a link between new atheists and Islam, because there's something very specific about new atheism that makes it very linked with Islam. And this is a much stronger correlation than any prior manifestation of atheism that we can see in the previous century. I'm going to then look at some of the main contentions of new atheism, like what are the charges that they bring against religion, and I'm trying to specifically focus on the charges they bring against Islam when I can. I then talk about some of the errors that they have, because I think in addition to their assertions, we need to critically evaluate what they're saying. And finally, what is the goal of new atheism? And I think this will be a very important point, a take-home message, so that we're aware as Muslims in terms of how atheism as an ideology, at least in its modern manifestation, is trying to implement its framework through society. So new atheism, I think it would be fair to say, started off with these 4 characters. These people are known as the 4 horsemen. This is a biblical reference. And these are the 4 publications that got them collectively on the map. In 2004, Sam Harris, he wrote the book called The End of Faith. In this book, he very harshly criticizes Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, Islam in particular. He is a philosopher of mind, but also a neuroscientist. Daniel Dennett is a philosopher of mind. In 2006, he published Breaking the Spell. This is not his first book. He's published several books before then. And 2006, arguably the face of new atheism is Richard Dawkins. He wrote the book, The God Delusion. It's been translated into multiple languages, particularly Arabic and Farsi, so that it can be disseminated even in the Muslim countries, because this book is banned in the Middle East, right? And then we have Christopher Hitchens. He has passed away. So this is the guy on the bottom right corner, this guy here. And he wrote a book called God is Not Great. So for those of you know the adhan where it says Allahu Akbar, right? So God is great, or God is the greatest. This is actually a wordplay of that adhan. God is not great. And that's where the terminology comes from in the name. The language that these guys collectively use is very harsh, very hostile, and very non-charitable to religious folks in general. We'll get to some of their quotations in a second. Now, New Atheism may have started with those folks, but it doesn't end with them. And I think it's safe to say that we have now many more people that are coming under New Atheism. You can kind of call this the second wave. We have people like Lawrence Krauss. He wrote a book called The Universe from Nothing. Michael Shermer, he wrote a book called I think he's the editor of the Skeptic magazine. We have Victor Stenger. He was a physicist. He wrote a book called God, the Failed Hypothesis. He's passed away. A.C. Grayling is a British philosopher. He's written multiple books on philosophy, and logic is his main area. And he's also written a book on, theism and how atheism is a stronger position. So there are multiple people that come under the rubric, but it is these four that kind of started the whole thing. And Dawkins is, without a shadow of a doubt, the face of the organization. Now, the link between New Atheism is very interesting, between atheism and Islam. And I actually have multiple quotations, but I'm sharing only the one here. And I want to emphasize this very point. All the quotations that I have recorded about people trying to see a link between New Atheism and Islam, all of them are by non-Muslims. So this is not me kind of self-serving a framework where we're taking up Muslim scholars who are saying that atheism is being very provocative with Islam and what have you. These are non-Muslims who have observed these, and they're the ones making these claims, right? One of the people that I've quoted in this particular presentation is Rabbi William Emerson. This is what he has to say in an article that he published a few years back. In my view, the newness of New Atheism has very little to do with its in-your-face, aggressive nature, or its popularity, or even its scientific approach to religion. What seems to distinguish it from earlier forms of atheism is the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, ways it critiques and attacks Islam through its scattergun critique of religion in general. For the new atheists, their general condemnation of religion targets not only Islamic extremism, but also Islam, because in the main, they admit no meaningful distinction between moderate and extremist Islam. And this is the important part. More than anything else, in my view, their attack on Islam is what puts the new into New Atheism. Islam in the New Atheist writings is consistently depicted as irrational, immoral, and in its purest form, violent, right? So this is a very important observation that a non-Muslim is making about this movement. And I think we have to take heed to that, right? In the sense that what exactly is putting the newness in New Atheism, and why are they getting so much popularity? Others have noted that the only reason, perhaps the only reason, New Atheism was so catalytic was because these books were written fresh after the 9/11 episode, right? So the Twin Tower plane crash. So that's one of the things that people point out to, that had that event not happened, had the stigma of being a Muslim was not so prevalent at the time, the negative connotations that Islam and Muslims had at the time were not so predominant, then perhaps atheism would not have climbed to the success it has had today. So this is, these are just some historical things to look into. Getting straight to the point now, I want to highlight three general considerations that atheists throw at religious folks in general and Islam in particular. I think the first one resonates very well with every single atheist author. Fundamentally, they believe that science can answer everything, like literally everything, right? So they pit science with religion, or they pit science with God, and they convert everything into a scientific question, right? And because of this framework, they believe that science can ultimately undermine religion in every shape or form. Now, people, particularly who are untrained in philosophy, they might think, hey, what's wrong with that? Science is an excellent utility. We'll get to some of the problems with this kind of worldview in a second, but take it for now that this is their position, that science can answer everything. Religious folks answer nothing. Religion has no explanation value whatsoever, and therefore it needs to be disposed of. Even the very question of God, right, has to be converted to a scientific question. So this is Richard Dawkins. He's put it this way: either God exists or he doesn't. It is a scientific question. One day we may know the answer, and meanwhile we can say something pretty strong about the probability. And this is where the whole binary narrative comes in. You're either a scientist or a religious person. You can't be both. And that's the kind of binary answers that we get by the new atheists in their writings. The second claim: Islam is a very barbaric religion. And this is nothing new. I think we've kind of seen this in the Fox News narrative. And it's just being picked up again after the Clash of Civilizations narrative, right? So the two people who I believe are really, really vocal with this kind of rhetoric are Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris. And this is a quotation that you can find in The End of Faith by Sam Harris. He says, "It is not merely that we are at war with an otherwise peaceful religion that has been hijacked by extremists. We are at war with precisely the vision of life that is prescribed to all Muslims in the Quran and further elaborated in the literature of the Hadith. A future in which Islam and West do not stand on the brink of mutual annihilation is a future in which most Muslims have learned to ignore most of their canon, just as most Christians have learned to do so. Such a transformation is by no means guaranteed to occur, however, given the tenets of Islam." So essentially, what he's portraying here is this idea that the West and Islam are fundamentally incompatible with one another, and particularly with folks living in the States, in Canada, and the UK. I mean, this is rubbed off constantly, again and again, not just from you atheists, but secularists, Islamophobes. I mean, like you've got several fronts up in place that where Muslims are always on the edge, on the defensive edge, and this just adds fuel to the fire, right? So this kind of rhetoric is very poisonous because the media inflames this, and you get further alienation between Muslims and non-Muslims, and particularly in non-Muslim majority societies. So this is a common problem that we find across all these different camps. This is another quotation by Hitchens. "Islam has never forgiven the Jews for encountering Muhammad and deciding that he was not the authentic messenger, for emphasizing tribe and dynasty and racial provenance in its holy books. Religion must accept the responsibility for transmitting one of mankind's most primitive illusions down through the generations." So here, what he's claiming is that during the time the Prophet, peace be upon him, when he was delivering revelation and when he was alive and what have you, he basically alienated the Jews at the time. And since then, Muslims and Jews have been always confrontational with one another. The problem with this narrative is that it is historically false. While the Prophet ﷺ disagreed theologically on many angles with the Jewish people of the time, if you see the entire history of Muslim thought, you'll find that Jews, in fact, found more safety in Muslim lands than they did in Christian lands. And that's because they were persecuted in Christian predominant lands. So this is actually a historical problem a historical statement that Hitchens fails to acknowledge. And what he's just trying to do, and this is generally you'll find in most of the new atheist literature, is that it is very based on brushstroke scenarios and simplicity. When you remove black and white narratives, when you move gray narratives and you focus on black and white, you get the exact same rigidity, exact same mentality as you do with fundamentalists. So I personally see a lot of similarities between the new atheist literature and even fundamentalist rhetoric. And this is a clear example of this kind of presentation. Finally, Islam is a very stupid and backward religion. And I apologize in case if that seems, offensive or provocative, but this is exactly the language that they use, right? And to give you an example, this was a very interesting paragraph that I found in Hitchens' book. So he, to give you context, this is a situation that he's recorded of Nigeria. Now, Nigeria was polio free, so we have vaccines for polio, right? Now, he takes a case where polio was reintroduced into the country because of so-called religious fatwas or scholars making edicts, religious edicts, that kind of banned using, vaccination. So let's see what he says. In northern Nigeria, a country that had previously checked in as a provisionally polio-free country, a group of Islamic religious figures issued a ruling or fatwa that declared the polio vaccine to be a conspiracy by the United States and amazingly, the United Nations against the Muslim faith. The drops were designed, said the mullahs, to sterilize the true believers. Their intention and effect was genocidal. Nobody was allowed to swallow them or administer them to infants. Within months, polio was back, and not just in northern Nigeria. Nigerian travelers and pilgrims had already taken it as far as Mecca and spread it back to several other polio-free countries, including 3 African ones also far away, Yemen. So now I'm going to explain the context of this in a second, but this is the kind of episodes they jump on. So here we have, these religious folks look kind of rubbish in their claiming, and how they're even rejecting vaccinations because they think it's some kind of conspiracy which will lead to people being sterile, right? And getting their faiths disseminated. So this is the kind of rhetoric we see in the New Atheist literature. So that kind of sums up, the claims of New Atheism. Of course, there's much more. I'm not providing an exhaustive list here, but now let's look at some of the, the way we can kind of identify the errors in the New Atheist literature. Okay. I start with the science because I think it's generally the most obvious one, and I think it affects people the most, particularly young children, teenagers. So, I mean, I'm aware of families have approached me where their kids have left Islam or on the brink of leaving Islam because for them the science is just so overwhelming. Evolution is, a big question. That's why we had that talk previously. Evolution is being used particularly by New Atheists because it seems to undermine religion scripturally and undermines God and what have you. And so therefore people find that convincing and therefore they leave Islam altogether. Now, we have to make a distinction here, which I think is very important, particularly for parents. I think this is a very useful thing to acknowledge. There's a difference between science, which is a method, and scientism, which is an ideology. Okay. Science is our ability to use whatever we can, whatever methodological framework we use to be able to understand the natural world, right? So this involves experimentation, involves, using computers, being able to describe certain phenomena mathematically, coming up with theories, coming up with equations. These are all methodological claims, right? Science is a method. Scientism, however, is an ideology, which is the idea that everything can only be explained scientifically. Okay, that's the ideology. Now, as Muslims, we have no problem with science, but scientism, however, is fundamentally at odds with the Islamic faith because scientism is not a worldview that we adopt. And to kind of show you that scientism is not an exhaustive perspective, we can easily see this by identifying 2 things: the presuppositions of science and what are the limits of science, right? And there's a vast literature on this, so I'm simplifying this. So hopefully if you have any questions, we can pick up on this in the Q&A. But just to cut it short, presuppositions are those things which pretty much all scientists have to presume to get science running. If these presumptions are not there, you will never have science. Science would be impossible, right? 2 of these things are temporal uniformity and spatial uniformity. Now, what do I mean by that? That seems like very technical terminology. Temporal uniformity simply means that when you have certain phenomena that you're looking at, it works the same way in the past, it works the same way now, and you expect it to work the same way tomorrow, right? So for example, here I have so I don't know if you can't see me in the camera, but if I have a pen and I drop the pen will go down, right? And I notice every time that I drop the pen, it always goes down. From there, I can make a generalization, right? Now, the thing is, even though tomorrow didn't come yet, tomorrow hasn't come, tomorrow is still an open future, I presume that all my observations in the past will work in the future. This is known as temporal uniformity. That you believe that you believe that all your laws of nature will hold tomorrow, right? So this is known as temporal uniformity. Science cannot work without this presumption. So if imagine you have the pen dropping down on one occasion, it dropping down to the left on another occasion. If you drop it, it goes up on another occasion. If you drop it, it goes right in another occasion. If it goes in different directions every time you drop it, you can no longer generalize a law out of it. You cannot come up with a scientific theory because every moment is so radically different. Science works with the presumption that there are these regularities that constantly behave in the same manner through which we can extract an explanation from, right? If you don't have that, it's impossible to do science. Spatial uniformity is simply this idea that the same phenomenon that I do in Dubai is the same as it is in the UK. So if I drop my pen, right, in UAE, in Dubai, it will go down just like as it would in the UK, right? So we also believe that our laws that we discover, they must be the same everywhere. And again, this is based on a presumption. This is not something that scientists have proven. They presuppose these things. Now, this in of itself indicates that science cannot prove everything because it must rely on certain philosophical presumptions to get the ground running. So scientism automatically banks itself because of these presumptions. So when somebody claims, oh yeah, science can pretty much solve everything, well then these presumptions that you're having, where did they come from? They didn't come from science. You just have to presume them, right? Now, in addition to these presuppositions, we have limits to science as well. So one example is ethics, right? So no matter how many different experiments you choose, you can never find morality in a test tube, right? No matter how much you dissect the brain, no matter how many cells you divide up, no matter how many neurons you fire up, right? You are never going to find killing is wrong in the brain. You're never going to have an X-ray where there's a moral prescription, right? Where it says, oh yeah, if you take an X-ray, you'll find out that smoking is a bad thing. Prescriptions, right? Prescriptions aren't coming with the data set. They are prescribed by human beings. So ethics is a huge domain which science cannot fully answer. And I know this may seem like maybe a radical claim or a novel claim to some of you. In the general literature of philosophy of religion, this is a big discussion, and I acknowledge that, but I'm just kind of sharing simple example tidbits to kind of make sense of this as we go along. Mathematics is one example. So mathematics are these abstract notions that don't seem to, exist anywhere, but we make sense of them. So for example, even if the universe didn't exist, let's say the whole creation never existed, the claim 1 + 1 is equal to 2 would still be true, right? Mathematics have this weird quality about them that they seem to have a reality that don't seem to be affected by our natural world. So what are they, right? Are they like these non-physical things that just stay there as they are, right? So these are things that scientists can also claim to have proven scientifically. Finally, the claim itself. If you are claiming that science can answer absolutely everything, the claim itself is unscientific, right? Because obviously it hasn't. It's a belief system that you're imposing. So it's kind of you're shooting yourself in the foot. To claim that science can answer everything is to basically refute what the position is trying to say. If you believe that science has an answer for everything, the moment you say, yeah, science can answer everything, that's not based on empirical demonstration. That's not based on an experiment. That's just